Hello everyone, welcome to today's class. The idea of today is that we are going to continue with these Python preliminaries, if you like. Okay, in the previous lecture we quickly introduced Python as a programming language and how the main features of Python. Okay, how can we, for example, create variables, how can we create loops, and so on. The idea of these lectures is certainly not to go into the details of programming, but just to give you an important details or minor details of Python. Okay, I'm assuming that you are familiar with programming at this point, and I'm assuming that now you are comfortable with Python. Okay, if you are not comfortable with Python, I strongly recommend that you work on that particular part, because it's going to be quite important for the next couple of lectures. Actually, this module is going to be, we are going to have a strong component, practical component. Okay, and for example, what I want to say is that there are lots of libraries for machine learning tools with very good implementations, but still we need to process the data. And actually, one of the first project assignment that I'm going to be giving you in a couple of weeks is going to be to actually implement manually one of those libraries. Okay, so because this is the best way in order to learn, to know how everything is working inside. Okay, so basically that's something that we have to take into account. And the idea of today is that we're going to be using Pandas. We're going to be introducing Pandas as a tool. Pandas is a library that we have in Python in order to process data, to pre-process this data and things like that. Okay, so and that's basically the idea of today. We're going to be working on this in this lecture and probably in the next lecture as well. Okay, so basically, as I was saying, Pandas is one of the most important tools that we have in Python in order to process data. Okay, so it's going to be one of the most important tools that a data scientist that they need to be able to deal with in a comfortable way. You will be seeing that it's quite easy. Okay, there are a lot of things that you can do, and it's quite easy to work with. Okay, and actually, what is Pandas is just an efficient way of implementing or processing data in what we call a data frame. Okay, so basically this is going to be quite good in order to process data. Of course, if you want, you can also implement your own code in order to process the data, but in that way it's going to be time consuming because you will need to implement that, and that's going to take a lot of times. We will be seeing that a lot of times in order to pre-process the data in a particular way. If we use Pandas, it's going to be, we are not going to need a lot of time for that. It's going to be almost automatic. And also the implementations that we are using in Pandas, they are very optimized. So they are very good implementations. They are optimized. I don't know if you are familiar with this, but there are a lot of differences between different programming languages. Okay, for example, Python is a very high level programming language, and if you have a program that is, for example, in C or C++, that is a little bit low-level programming language, is going to be way faster than Python. Okay, so if you implement your code in Python, it's going to be most likely very slow compared to a C++ implementation or a C implementation. So basically, what these guys are doing in Pandas is that they have very good implementations in C or C++ or what they call Cython, and then they have a way in order to use those libraries from Python. Okay, so we don't need to know C++. All we are doing is that we are going to write the code in Python, and then there is a layer in the middle that is going to be using that implementation that is in C, that is very good, it's well optimized. So it's going to be really good in order to processing time. And that's important because if we are dealing with lots of data, it needs to be efficient. So that's why we are going to be using that. And also Pandas is very popular and is widely used, okay, in academic projects and also in commercial projects in the industry. I mean, I would be surprised if someone in the industry is not using, if they are working in this area and they don't know Pandas, because Pandas is one of the most important ones. And a lot of people is going to be using Pandas. So that's one of the main reasons. So Pandas, if you are working with Python, okay, because if you are working with other libraries, for example with R, then they also have data frames, but they don't have Pandas because it's similar, okay, but this is just the Pandas is this library for Python. Okay, so basically Pandas is going to allow you to give you a lot of functionality, and one of the functionalities is that we're going to be able to read data from a CSV file, okay, or it could be from a database, or it could be from an Excel document, and we're going to be importing that data into Python. And basically at the end of the day, it's going to be a couple of lines of code, of Python code, and we will be seeing examples. Then we import that data, and now that data is going to be with a quite similar structure as in the Excel document or in the CSV file. And that's going to be one of the main features that we have. And then we can start processing that data, and then now that we have Pandas, we can start aggregating that data in order to, for example, remove values that are missing values. Okay, for example, one of the most popular problems that we have in this kind of projects, of machine learning projects, is that we have to remove missing data because that's going to be confusing for the algorithms, for the machine learning method. So we have to remove that. Sometimes we also have to do computing general information about the data set. So we have to aggregate data, for example, calculate the most popular product, the least popular product, the product that is giving us the better profit, and so on and so forth. We can also compute the median, the mean, and so on and so forth. And all of this is going to be with only a couple of lines if we know how to use Pandas properly. Okay, so the most important concept or preliminary concept that we need to know about Pandas is a data frame. Okay, a data frame is going to look like a Excel document. Okay, and basically what we're going to have is that we have columns and rows, and then we can access that with an index and so on and so forth. Okay, and inside the data frame we're going to have what we call a data series, and basically this is going to look like a dictionary. And let me show you this with this example. Okay, so basically this is what we are going to be seeing in a data frame. Basically what we have in a data frame is more or less what we have here in an Excel document. Okay, we have columns and then we have rows in the data frame, and then basically what we can say is that we are going to have one column that is going to be the age, another one that is going to be the name, another one that is going to be survive, and then we have the index. Okay, and it's going to look like this, and then we can get elements. For example, we can get the age of a particular element in my data frame, and so on and so forth. Okay, so for example, this is a popular data set. It's called the Titanic data set, if I remember correctly. But okay, anyway, what I want to say is that the structure of a data frame is going to be more or less like this. Okay, of course we can have more columns, we can have more data, and so on and so forth. But the structure is going to be more or less in this context. And one of these elements, we are going to be saying that this is going to be a data series. It's just to give you context of what we have to deal with in Pandas. Okay, and basically we can create, there are multiple ways of creating a data frame. One of the ways is that we are going to be using a dictionary, and we can also see a data frame as a dictionary. I prefer to have a look at this as the data frame as an Excel document, because it's going to be the visual way that we have it. But inside Pandas, you can see this as a dictionary. Okay, so basically remember that in a dictionary, what we have is key values. Okay, so basically the key is going to be the name, and these are going to be the values, and then with grade, and these are going to be the values. And basically what we are going to have is that this is going to look like this: name and grade. And then we have the names: Bob, Ken. Well, my handwriting is not fantastic, but you get the idea. Okay, so basically this one is coming here, and this one is coming here, and then we have 50 for the first one, and so on and so forth. Okay, so basically I guess you get the idea. Now, this is just an example, as I was saying. So basically you can see a data frame, and you can create a data frame with a dictionary. Okay, but we can have you can have more This is just an example. Okay, something important when you are using Pandas is that at the very beginning, you will need to import the libraries that include this functionality. And basically for that, we are going to be using import pandas as PD. This is just the way that we are going to be using, at least in the lectures. You can use different names here, but I recommend this. And then now we know that we are going to be using pandas. And then also another important library is NumPython, which is another library for processing data. That's also, sometimes we're going to be also using this library. And basically this is just another example of how to create a data frame. Again, we are in this particular example, we are creating a data frame with a dictionary. Okay, as I was mentioning before, we import the libraries, and now we create the information that we have. And basically what we are doing here is that we are saying, okay, look, Pandas, create a data frame with this data. So that's why we have PD, because that's how we declare Pandas here at the very beginning, and then dot data frame, and so on and so forth. And then my data frame is going to be in this variable frame. So let's have a look at this. We can check this in a minute. Okay, for example, we are going to be saying that we have import pandas as PD. So basically we are importing this library. Now we are importing NumPy. For this particular example, you don't need NumPy, but still that's fine. Okay, so let me just quickly copy this. It's going to be faster. Okay, and now what we can do is that we can just have a look at frame. And then we see now that we have this data frame, and this is the structure of the data frame, as I was saying before. So something that is important in this particular case, in this particular example, I'm using Python 2 point something, but if you are using Python 3, you will need to include these parentheses in order to avoid problems with the library. Okay, so basically here what I want to mention is important things. Don't forget to include the imports, because that's a very popular mistake at the very beginning when we are dealing with pandas, that most of the students they are forgetting to include these libraries. And if you don't include these libraries, you are going to get errors, and so on and so forth. And basically this is what I was just saying before. So if you are working with Python 3, don't forget to include this in order to avoid this particular error. And basically now we're creating a data frame, and now we can start dealing with or interacting with this data frame in any way that we want. Okay, for example, now what we want to say is that we want to rename we can rename the columns if we want, or change the order of the columns. So basically we are going to be seeing that these are going to be appearing like this. In this case we have a population, state, and year. And now we want to get this in this particular order. Okay, so basically we're going to say that first we're going to have the year, and then the state, and then the population. We're creating that in this particular order. Okay, so just to have that into account. And now we can have the index by default. Pandas is going to give you index like numbers like this. But you can change that if you want. Okay, you can say now we are going to be using these names, these numbers, in order to create the index. Okay, and something important here again is that, for example, here in the example with the data frame, we only have year, state, population, but we don't have this particular variable. Okay, we don't have this column in the original dictionary as we defined that before. As you can see here, we don't have that particular entry, that particular element in the original dictionary that we are using in order to create the data frame. So basically what we will be seeing here is that is not a number is going to be appearing, because we don't have that particular data. So that's how Pandas is going to complete the data frame, because remember, at the end Pandas is going to create a data frame with that particular structure, and if there is missing data, then basically this is what we are going to be seeing if we have that particular missing data. Okay, so if we have a look at this, we are going to be seeing, you can also print the columns that you have. Okay, if you want to have a look at the columns that you have, and basically you just use the data frame variable dot columns, and then this is more or less what you will be getting. This is just to see where, in this particular case it's quite easy because we are creating the data frames, but sometimes we get a data frame and we don't know the structure of the data frame. So this is going to be quite useful, okay, because now we know how to access, we know what information we have in this particular data frame, and this is how we can start dealing with that. Now, if we want to start getting columns of my data frame, well, the way that we are going to be using is we have two alternatives. One is going to be the data frame dot and the name of that particular column. In this case, we want to get the year. Okay, in this way, you are just going to get the index, of course, and the year. So for this index, we're going to have this value. For this index, we're going to have this value. For this index, we're going to have this value, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is if we use the year the dot notation. But you have to be careful with the dot notation. Why? Because sometimes the names, this at the end, this name is going to be that we have in here. This is just a string, and sometimes we have spaces. Sometimes we have particular symbols that are not very nice for the dot operator. Okay, so this is one way, but I strongly recommend to use this other way in order to access your columns. Okay, use this operator, these brackets, opening and closing, and then the name of your column. Okay, because here if you have spaces, then this is going to be easier to, then Pandas is not going to get confused. Okay, I mean, and I'm describing the two options, but in my personal opinion, I prefer to use this one because it's going to be easier in the general case. Okay, so, and again, here all we want to get is a particular attribute, a particular column, and all the elements for that particular column. That sometimes I call this an attribute of the data frame. Okay, and you can get, for example, now, for example, at the very beginning, you remember that we create this data frame and we didn't have anything. So basically now, if we want to assign a value to all the columns for this particular entry, what we are going to be doing is that we say that, okay, now we want to get this column, and we are going to be assigning this particular value to all the entries for all the elements in that in the data frame for this particular column, and that's how we are going to be doing that. Okay, and then we print I strongly recommend that, in particular at these very early stages of interacting with Pandas, I strongly recommend that you print very often to see what you are getting. Okay, for example, as you were seeing here, I was printing just to see the frame, the data frame. Okay, and then now we can say print frame and columns, and then we see what we're getting. Of course, here we're not getting exactly what we're having here because this is the first data frame that we create, but we can create more. Okay, this is just an example of how we deal with, and I strongly recommend that you deal with these data frames, that you start with the basics. Okay, start creating small data frames and things like that. And actually, I'm trying to follow this lecture, and if you have to stop and stop the video, but I strongly recommend that you create these data frames in your own computer in order to see that you have that.